Security shaves black woman's head at courthouse, turns out she's the judge. It started like any other morning until it turned into a nightmare. In the heart of Atlanta, Georgia, the courthouse on Jefferson Avenue loomed like a fortress under a gray sky. Inside, fluorescent lights flickered. Officers yawned behind security desks. Coffee steamed from paper cups. It was supposed to be just another day. Until it wasn't. A black woman stepped through the glass doors. Veronica Hayes, calm, composed, every step purposeful. She wasn't wearing a robe or making a scene. Just a navy blue blazer, a leather portfolio, and the kind of quiet confidence most people ignored until it was too late. But the men guarding the front entrance weren't watching for confidence. They were watching for control. Who had it, and who didn't. And in their eyes, Veronica had too much. She walked through the metal detectors like any other citizen, not expecting a welcome. But what she got instead was humiliation. The moment she approached, the energy shifted. The lead security officer, Deputy Carl Dobson, a thick-set man with sun-damaged skin and a smirk carved from too many years of unchecked power, stepped in her path. He didn't recognize her. More importantly, he didn't want to. "Ma'am," he barked, holding up a hand, his latex gloves snapping into place. "Gonna need you to step out of line." Veronica blinked, just once. Her voice was measured. "Is there a problem, officer?" Dobson didn't answer right away. His eyes scanned her, her silver twists pinned neatly to her scalp, her slacks crisp, her shoulders squared. She looked like she belonged. And that, more than anything, pissed him off. "No ID displayed," he grunted. "You can't just walk into a federal building like it's a grocery store." Veronica didn't flinch. She reached into her blazer, pulled out a federal badge, the kind that should have ended the conversation. But Dobson didn't even glance at it. He snatched it from her fingers and stuffed it into his pocket. Veronica's eyebrows arched. "I'd like that returned." He stepped closer, his breath a sour mix of coffee and contempt. "You in a rush, sweetheart?" he sneered. The word landed like a slap. A younger female guard, barely in her 20s, hovered nervously near the X-ray scanner. She saw the tension, felt it twist the air, but said nothing. She looked down. "I need to get to a courtroom," Veronica said, her tone now edged with steel. "Then follow my procedure," Dobson snapped. "That includes a secondary screening. Random checks." He didn't wait for consent. With one meaty hand, he grabbed her upper arm and steered her away from the main line, down a side corridor, away from witnesses, away from cameras, toward a dimly lit screening room just past the primary checkpoint. The air inside was cooler. Still, there was a steel chair in the middle of the floor, a metal cart with scanning equipment, and sitting on the edge a set of clippers. Veronica's breath caught. "I don't consent to this," she said. Her voice was sharp, unshaken. "You have no cause to detain me. This is unlawful." Dobson didn't blink. "You're acting suspicious. That's cause enough." He pointed to the chair. "Sit." Veronica didn't move. That's when two more officers entered. One bald, twitchy. The other silent, but not confused. They moved like they'd done this before. One gripped her left wrist. The other held the back of the chair. "This is a violation of my civil rights," she declared. "I want your names. I want your supervisor." Dobson didn't answer. Instead, he grabbed the clippers. "What are you doing?" she demanded. He smirked. "Standard protocol. You could be hiding something in that mop." He reached forward. The clippers buzzed to life. The sound filled the room, high, electric, brutal. Before she could twist away, the cold metal touched her scalp. A thick twist of silver hair dropped to the floor. Then another. And another. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She sat there, eyes wide open, watching the strands fall like memories shredded in slow motion. Behind her, one officer chuckled. "She looks better already." Dobson wiped a few loose hairs off his uniform. "Now you look more presentable." Veronica's fists clenched in her lap. The skin over her knuckles had turned white. But her voice, when it returned, was steady. "You will regret this." Dobson sneered. "People like you always say that." Then, just as abruptly as it began, it ended. He tossed the clippers aside, opened the door, and gestured toward the hall. "You're free to go," he said mockingly. "Courtroom's that way." Veronica rose slowly. Her hands trembled. Her badge still in Dobson's pocket she retrieved without asking. And then, without a word, she walked down the hall, each step a silent promise. Because what they didn't know, what they never bothered to ask, was who she really was. She wasn't there to be judged. She was the judge. And justice was just getting started. The badge felt heavier in her hand now. Not from weight but from insult. As Veronica Hayes stepped back into the main hallway of the Atlanta Federal Courthouse, the morning light filtering through the tall glass panel struck the polished tile floors like stage lights, casting long shadows that danced around her feet. Outside, the city was waking up. Inside, something much darker had already risen. She adjusted the collar of her blazer. Her heels clicked against the marble, sharp, measured, deliberate. Every sound echoed through the corridor like a verdict. She walked past legal clerks, interns with binders clutched to their chests, attorneys balancing coffee and case files. Some glanced at her. Most looked away. A few had seen what happened. None said a word. That was always the danger of silence. It wasn't just complicity, it was comfort. And institutions fed off it like oxygen. Veronica didn't wear her judge's robe outside the courtroom. She never had. She believed justice should not be announced by wardrobe but by presence. That power should speak softly but unshakably. But today, no one saw her power. They only saw a black woman. And that was enough for them to think she was less. At the top of the corridor, just past the seal of the Department of Justice etched into the granite wall, stood the main security checkpoint. The place where it had all begun just minutes earlier. But to Veronica, it already felt like a different lifetime. She had faced difficult mornings in her career, controversial hearings, violent threats, public backlash. But never this. Never dehumanization at the very threshold of her own courthouse. Behind the checkpoint, Deputy Carl Dobson had returned to his post, arms crossed over his chest like nothing had happened. A few officers glanced at him, unsure whether to laugh, nod, or retreat into apathy. He looked smug, still convinced he had won something. He didn't realize he had just signed his professional death certificate. Veronica didn't speak to him. She didn't need to. She passed by with the calm of someone who understood that true power never had to announce itself. Dobson's grin faltered for a half-second. Just a twitch. But it was there. She moved down the side hall leading to courtroom 4B, the largest and most watched chamber in the district. Cameras weren't allowed inside, but the press pool was already whispering. Today's hearing involved police misconduct during a protest that had made national headlines. The gallery would be packed. Civil rights lawyers, media outlets, families of victims. And sitting at the center of it all would be Judge Veronica Hayes. But none of them, not one, would expect that the woman walking in with uneven, freshly butchered hair was the one presiding. She reached the small holding room connected to the courtroom's private entrance. Her robe was waiting there, pressed, folded neatly on a wooden hanger. Her staff, well trained, had set everything perfectly. But nothing about this morning was perfect. She didn't reach for the robe right away. Instead, she stared at her reflection in the mirror. The sharp lines of her cheekbones. The raw red patches near her temple. The twist scars from where her hair once framed her face with pride. What she saw wasn't weakness. It was warning. Veronica slipped into the robe slowly, methodically. Not like dressing for duty but like donning armor. Every motion was intentional. Every breath a reminder, you are still here. They didn't break you. A soft knock on the side door. A clerk peeked in. Your Honor, she whispered. They're ready. Veronica nodded once. The time for quiet was over. She stepped toward the door's two massive wooden panels carved with the words, "Justice is the foundation of peace." Fitting. She reached out, took a breath, and pushed both doors open. The courtroom froze. All sound conversations, whispers, rustling of papers evaporated into silence. Dozens of heads turned. Stared. Blinked. Some furrowed brows in confusion. Others outright gasped. Because the woman they had seen escorted like a suspect, the one whose hair had clearly been shorn in some awful, inexplicable incident, was now walking straight toward the judge's bench. And she wasn't stopping. Not at the podium. Not at the press table. Not at the defense desk. She walked behind the bench. And turned. She was the judge. A storm passed through the courtroom. Not noise but impact. Emotional thunder. You could feel it settle into the bones of everyone present. Veronica didn't flinch. She didn't offer explanation. She didn't demand attention. She simply stood there. Her gaze sweeping over the room with cold precision. And when she spoke, her voice rang with steel. She stood still for a moment, just long enough for the truth to catch up to the room. The woman who had been manhandled. The woman whose scalp now bore the raw proof of injustice. The woman they had all watched in silence. She wasn't a visitor. She wasn't a victim. She was Judge Veronica Hayes, and she had just reclaimed her courtroom. A few attorneys fumbled with their pens. One of the junior prosecutors dropped a binder. Reporters shifted in their seats, unsure whether to jot down notes or simply stare. No one spoke. Not yet. Veronica turned with quiet control and took her place behind the bench. Her robe draped over her like smoke, flowing but unbreakable. As she lowered herself into the judge's chair, the leather groaned beneath her weight, a sound that might as well have been thunder. The bailiff near the rear door froze. It was Deputy Carl Dobson. His face lost color instantly. His mouth opened slightly, as if to speak, to explain, to plead, but no sound came out. His entire body locked in place like a soldier realizing he was standing in enemy territory. Veronica met his eyes. No rage. No words. Just that unflinching gaze. Dobson shrank where he stood. She looked away before he could even register the dismissal. Her fingers, steady now, reached for the docket on the bench. She flipped it open, checked the top sheet, and said calmly, "Is the docket ready for today?" Her court clerk, sitting a few feet away, nodded quickly. "Yes, Your Honor," she said, her voice cracking slightly. Veronica nodded once. Then silence again. She looked across the room to the attorneys seated for both the prosecution and defense. Some looked guilty. Others just looked stunned. And a few looked angry. Angry that a black woman, assaulted hours ago, hadn't crumbled. Hadn't quit. Hadn't even paused. She didn't give them the satisfaction of acknowledgement. Instead, she simply said, "We will begin today with preliminary testimony on Case 1194-J. The People of Georgia versus the Atlanta Police Department. Charges: abuse of power, excessive force, and violation of civil liberties." Her voice was clear. Unbothered. Unapologetically present. A few people in the gallery murmured, "Yes, Your Honor," under their breath, like they were repeating a sacred phrase. A ritual. A return to something they thought had been lost. But Veronica wasn't done. She looked to the prosecution team. You may call your first witness. The courtroom held its breath as a tall man rose from the gallery's second row. He wore a simple gray button-up and dark jeans. His posture was stiff. Not from pride but from trauma carried in the bones. He was escorted to the stand by a court officer. And Veronica saw something in his walk. The hesitation. The calculation. The memory of being treated like he didn't belong in this very room. He took the oath. Sat down. Adjusted the mic with calloused fingers. The prosecutor stepped forward. Please state your name for the record. The man's voice wavered. Calvin Price. Mr. Price, the prosecutor continued. Can you describe what happened to you on the night of July 14th, during the protest outside the downtown precinct? The man's eyes flicked toward the defense table. Then back to the judge. To Veronica. She didn't blink. Didn't nod. Just watched. He relaxed. Just slightly. And began. But Veronica wasn't hearing it like any other testimony. She was still in the room where they had shoved her into a chair. She could still hear the buzz of those clippers in her head. Still feel the tingle of air against freshly bared scalp. But she didn't let any of it show. Because now, this was what mattered. Giving that man this courtroom what she had been denied just an hour ago. A voice. And Carl Dobson? He was still frozen at the back of the courtroom, unsure whether to run or pray. Veronica's eyes didn't leave the witness stand, but she was painfully aware of every twitch from the man standing at the back of the courtroom. Deputy Carl Dobson. He had returned to his post like nothing happened. As if she were just another face he could forget. As if the strands of her hair now lying on a cold security room floor didn't matter. As if the scars he carved into her dignity hadn't left a mark. He was wrong. Dead wrong. The second witness finished testifying. A mother. Her voice cracked as she described how her teenage son had been thrown to the pavement and tossed during a peaceful protest. How they begged for medics. How no officer responded until the boy stopped moving. The courtroom was silent, but the rage inside it was deafening. Veronica closed the file gently. Then, she looked up. We'll take a brief recess, she said. The courtroom stood. Slowly, hesitantly, people shuffled out. Reporters whispering, eyes darting. Lawyers glancing sideways at each other. But Dobson stayed frozen. As the room emptied, it was just her clerk, two officers near the door, and him. Veronica remained seated behind the bench, calm as the eye of a storm. Then her voice rang out. Deputy Dobson. He stopped mid-step. Turned, stiffly. His face was pale. Mouth dry. Yes. Your Honor. She motioned to the center of the courtroom. Step forward. It wasn't a request. It was a sentence. Dobson moved like a man walking toward his own reckoning. Each step echoed across the chamber like footsteps in a tomb. He stood in the middle of the courtroom, shoulders hunched, trying to make himself smaller. Too late. Veronica leaned forward, voice like steel. State your full name for the record. He blinked. Excuse me. You heard me. A beat. Then, quieter, Carl Matthew Dobson. Her pen tapped gently against the desk. Once. Twice. Then still. And how long have you served as a courthouse deputy here in Atlanta? He swallowed hard. 15 years. Veronica's voice remained level. Almost cold. And in those 15 years, how many women have you forcibly detained in that screening room without cause? He stuttered. Your Honor, I didn't know who you were. She didn't flinch. That's not what I asked. Silence. How many complaints have been filed against you, Deputy Dobson? I don't remember. Her voice cut sharp now, slicing the air. 12. He blinked. She continued, tone steady, 12 formal complaints. All buried. All dismissed. Hidden behind protocol and random checks. Isn't that right? His mouth opened, but no sound came out. Veronica stood. The movement alone made him flinch. You didn't ask my name. She took a slow step down from the bench. You didn't check my ID. Another step forward. You didn't care who I was. You saw a black woman walking into a courthouse, and you decided that meant I didn't belong. That I couldn't possibly hold power. Now she stood just feet from him. Dobson's eyes darted. The two officers by the wall didn't move. Her clerk didn't move. Everyone knew what this was. This wasn't revenge. This was justice. Because of you, Veronica said, her voice breaking the silence like thunder, this courthouse, this so-called pillar of law has been stained. She turned to the officers near the exit. Escort Deputy Dobson into custody. Effective immediately. Gasps. Then movement. Separate from general population. Formal charges to follow. Dobson snapped out of his daze. Wait, you can't. But she already had. The officers stepped forward, cuffs in hand. He backed away instinctively. No, this is insane, she's using this, she's biased. Click. The cuffs closed around his wrists. The courtroom, empty moments ago, now felt full of ghosts. Years of buried complaints. Dozens of silenced voices. And one woman who refused to stay quiet. As Dobson was led away, his badge was pulled from his chest. His radio taken. His power evaporated. And still, Veronica Hayes didn't look satisfied. Because this wasn't over. Not yet. The door closed behind him with a final metallic clunk. And just like that, Carl Dobson, a man who had once barked orders and wielded control like a weapon, was gone. Stripped of his badge, his uniform, and the illusion of invincibility that had protected him for far too long. But the silence he left behind? It roared. Veronica stood alone in the center of her courtroom. Her robe hung heavy on her shoulders, but she carried it like armor. She didn't move for several long seconds. She let the quiet settle, let it breathe, let it press down on the walls like gravity returned. Only then did she turn and slowly ascend the steps back to the bench. She sat. Folded her hands. And let the full weight of the moment pass through her like a current. She had not raised her voice. She had not demanded vengeance. She had simply done what had to be done. Her clerk, still visibly shaken, returned to her post. Papers rustled with cautious movement. Outside the chamber, the murmurs of a reassembling crowd drifted in like whispers of a coming storm. Veronica adjusted her posture, fingers resting calmly on the edge of the bench. She wasn't here to perform. She was here to deliver. And nothing, not the clippers, not the bloodless violation, not even the deafening silence of complicit staff could shake her from that. Then came the sound, a low hum of voices, building slowly, growing louder with every footstep down the corridor. The courtroom doors opened. Journalists filtered in first, carrying notepads and eyes full of electricity. Behind them, family members of victims, civil rights attorneys, young law clerks, all returning to their seats with a new kind of tension in their movements. Not the routine tension of a typical hearing. This was different. This was history trying to break through. As Veronica looked across the courtroom, she saw recognition dawning in their eyes. They saw her. Not just as a judge. Not just as a black woman in robes. But as the very embodiment of something they had waited too long to witness. Accountability. Her robe was still slightly wrinkled from the way she'd pulled it on hours earlier. Her scalp still stung where clumps of silver hair once curled proudly. But none of that mattered. Because she was here. And she was about to do what so few had dared, hold power accountable from the inside out. She let her gaze drift toward the gallery, locking eyes with a white-haired man in a navy pinstripe suit. A senior defense attorney. The kind who shook hands with judges at golf clubs and wine bars. He looked away first. A pen clicked from the prosecution table. Veronica didn't look. She simply raised her voice, now smooth and unwavering. This court will resume proceedings in case 1194J. The room quieted instantly. You may call your next witness. The prosecution team stood. Your Honor, the state calls Officer Raymond Holloway to the stand. A uniformed officer, tall, lean, and visibly nervous, made his way forward. His posture was stiff military, almost, but his eyes flickered with the fear of a man who knew that today was not like any other day. He raised his hand, took the oath. Saturday. Behind him, dozens of eyes locked in, waiting not just for what he would say, but for what Veronica Hayes would do next. But Veronica wasn't thinking about Holloway's badge, or his scripted testimony. She was still hearing the sound of those clippers. The cold steel. The laughter. The way Dobson had said, "Now you look more presentable." She exhaled slowly, silently, and focused on the man before her. And in that breath, she reminded herself. This isn't just a courtroom anymore. It's a reckoning. And reckoning doesn't come quietly. The silence in the courtroom was suffocating. Not from tension. But from revelation. Because now, it had finally hit them, all of them. The woman seated at the bench, commanding the courtroom with poise and precision, wasn't just presiding over a case of systemic abuse. She was living proof of it. The bruises weren't visible. But the evidence was right there on her head, where hair had once coiled in dignified silver, now reduced to uneven patches and angry red skin. It was more than symbolic. It was undeniable. And the timing? It made everything impossible to ignore. Veronica turned her attention toward the defense table. One of the attorneys, young, suited, arrogant, couldn't meet her gaze. Another, a woman in her 40s, stared at the bench like she had just seen a ghost. Because she had. The ghost of every injustice they'd buried. Veronica's voice broke the silence like a gavel. We will proceed. The words were delivered with surgical clarity. No emotion. Just law. The prosecution called its second witness, a paramedic who had arrived on the scene too late to help a protester who had been choked unconscious by an officer's knee. His testimony was clinical, but the details: bruised windpipe, delayed response, misreported injuries cut through the room like broken glass under bare feet. Veronica took notes silently. She didn't ask questions. Not yet. Because she was waiting for the weight of the evidence to land not just on the record, but on the consciences of everyone in that room. From the corner of her eye, she saw movement. Dobson wasn't there. But his absence left a shadow. And in that shadow, the courtroom shifted. Not physically. But spiritually. It was no longer just a space for proceedings. It was a space for truth. The witness stepped down. The attorneys conferred. The gallery buzzed low with restrained whispers. Veronica leaned toward her clerk. We'll take a short recess. The room stood again. But this time, it wasn't just out of respect. It was out of reverence. Because something had shifted deep and permanent. As the room emptied, Veronica stayed seated. Her fingers tapped against the bench, slow, steady. And then she did something no one expected. She looked across the courtroom, locked eyes with a uniformed officer in the corner, and said, "Officer Nelson." He turned, startled. "Yes, Your Honor." "Ensure the next witness is ready." "Yes, ma'am." He moved quickly. But not out of routine. Out of fear. Not fear of her temper, but fear of her resolve. Because now, every officer in that courthouse knew, Veronica Hayes wasn't just holding a gavel. She was holding up a mirror. And the reflection was just getting started. The courtroom emptied slowly, like a building exhaling. Only a few people remained: Veronica's clerk, 2 bailiffs by the exit, and Carl Dobson, now standing near the rear door in cuffs, flanked by 2 officers. He hadn't been taken away yet. And that was by her design. Veronica closed the case folder in front of her and looked directly at him. Her voice sliced through the stillness. "Deputy Dobson." He flinched. The officers turned toward her. "Step forward." Dobson hesitated. The courtroom felt like it had shrunk, like the walls were inching closer with every second he delayed. But finally, he shuffled forward, chains lightly clinking, like echoes of all the freedoms he had once stolen from others. He stood in the center of the courtroom, under the full glare of the skylight above. His eyes flicked to the press box. Empty now. But not for long. Veronica sat tall behind the bench. "State your full name for the record." Dobson swallowed hard. "Carl Matthew Dobson." "How long have you served as a courthouse deputy in this jurisdiction?" He shifted in his shoes. 15 years. Veronica picked up her pen, tapped it once against the notepad, then leaned slightly forward. "And in those 15 years, how many women have you unlawfully detained in that screening room?" His eyes widened. I didn't, Your Honor, I didn't know." "That's not what I asked." Her voice wasn't raised, but the force behind it made the air feel thinner. Dobson looked around, searching for help. None came. Only silence. Heavy. Waiting. "How many complaints have been filed against you, Deputy Dobson?" I don't know." Veronica's voice sharpened, not louder, just more exact. 12. The number echoed in the chamber. She held up a thin manila folder, the kind used every day in that building to bury truths behind bureaucracy. 12 formal complaints. Her voice was a scalpel. All buried. All dismissed. Because you hid behind protocol. Because you believed procedure was a shield. Dobson tried again. "I didn't know who you were, I thought." She slammed the folder on the bench. "That's the problem, isn't it?" Her voice cracked the air like lightning. "You thought I was no one. Just another black woman you could intimidate. Humiliate. Cut down." Her fingers grazed the uneven hairs at her temple, "for sport." Silence. Total. There wasn't a breath out of place. Veronica stood slowly from her chair. "Because of you, this courthouse, this place meant to protect justice, has been stained." She looked directly into his eyes now. "Because of you, the sanctity of this court is under question." Her voice dropped lower, colder. "And because you assaulted a federal judge in her own courthouse, you are now the subject of a criminal investigation under federal law." She turned to the 2 officers beside the door. "Escort Deputy Dobson into federal custody. Separate from general population. Formal charges to follow." They moved immediately. One took his arm. Dobson's face drained. No, wait. You can't do this." But he was wrong. She already had. As they led him away, the weight of the moment settled into the room like a stone dropped in still water. The ripples? They were only just beginning. Veronica returned to her seat. Her fingers laced together on the bench. Her expression unreadable. But her message was undeniable. This is no longer a courtroom. This is a reckoning. The courtroom was still. Not in the way it had been before, frozen in tension or paralyzed by revelation. This silence felt cleansed. Like the air had been burned and was now cooling down, slowly reclaiming its purity. Carl Dobson was gone. The echo of the door closing behind him had already faded, but the imprint of what had just happened remained in every corner of the room. Veronica sat alone at the bench, fingers laced in front of her, eyes fixed on nothing in particular. Her mind was both still and racing, grappling with everything that had unraveled, everything that had been exposed, and the fire still flickering quietly inside her chest. She heard the soft knock before the door even opened. Her clerk stepped halfway into the room. "Your Honor," she said gently, "there's someone who'd like to speak with you. Privately." Veronica looked up. "Who?" A moment's hesitation. Then the clerk stepped aside. A young woman entered. Barely in her 20s. Wire-rimmed glasses fogged at the corners. Shoulders tight with uncertainty. Fingers nervously twisting the hem of her navy cardigan. Megan. One of the summer legal interns. Quiet, observant, the kind who faded into the background unless directly addressed. Veronica recognized her immediately. And Megan looked like she might shatter into pieces at any moment. She stepped inside, closing the door behind her with care as though afraid to disturb the air around them. "Your Honor," she began, voice barely above a whisper. Veronica said nothing. Just watched her. Gently. Patiently. Megan took another step forward. She didn't make eye contact. "I saw it." Veronica's brows lifted slightly. Megan continued. "This morning, when Deputy Dobson pulled you aside." Her voice trembled. Her hands shook. I didn't know what to do. I saw him take your ID. I saw the door close. I even heard the clippers, I think. But I froze." Veronica remained quiet. Megan finally looked up, eyes glassy. "I should have said something. I should have done something. But I was scared." There it was. Raw and human. Not just guilt but that universal fear that silences so many. What if I speak, and no one listens? What if I stand up, and I'm alone? Still seated, Veronica let the moment breathe. She studied the young woman, not with judgment, but with understanding. Then she spoke. Softly. "Thank you for telling me." Megan blinked. "But I didn't stop it." Veronica shook her head, voice steady. "No. But you're speaking now. And somehow, that meant everything." Megan's breath hitched. For a moment, she looked like she might cry. But instead, she straightened her back just a little. Her voice steadied. "If you need me to testify, I will." Veronica didn't smile. Didn't dramatize. She simply reached across the desk, placed her hand gently over Megan's for a brief second. No words. Just a touch. Just a connection. Just a quiet transfer of courage between two generations of black women inside a system that had tried again and again to erase them both. Then came the second knock. Heavier. Louder. The courtroom doors creaked open behind them. The gallery was returning. Veronica released Megan's hand and rose to her feet. Her clerk stepped inside. "All rise," she called out, her voice stronger this time. And the room obeyed. Even those who didn't want to. Even those who once laughed at Dobson's hallway jokes. They stood now. Because Veronica Hayes had. As the courtroom settled once more, the air had changed. It wasn't just the stillness of respect. It was the hush of awakening. Veronica took her seat again, not as a woman recovering from humiliation, not as a symbol of survival, but as the commanding force behind a shift in the very floor beneath them. The clerk called the next witness. The state calls Howard Briggs. A man rose from the front pew. Mid-40s. Broad shoulders, weary eyes, a gray sweatshirt worn under a workman's jacket. He walked with the stiffness of a man who carried too much in his bones. He was sworn in and sat down slowly, adjusting the microphone with calloused fingers. Veronica watched him not as a judge this time, but as someone who already knew what it meant to carry pain where justice was supposed to live. "Mr. Briggs," the prosecutor began softly, "can you tell the court what happened to your son?" Howard's jaw tightened. His voice cracked before he even spoke. "My son. Marcus, he was 17. A pause. "We were at the protest last year outside the police precinct downtown. It was peaceful. Signs, chanting. Nothing more." He swallowed hard. "Then officers came in. No warning. Pushed through the crowd. One of them, big guy, shaved head, he tackled my boy. Took him straight to the ground. His hands shook slightly. Then he put his knee on his neck. I saw it. I screamed." Marcus tried to say something but he couldn't get air. The room was silent except for the squeak of a pen against paper. "We begged them. I begged. I said, he's just a kid. He's not fighting. They told me he was faking. That he'd be fine." He looked up into Veronica's eyes. "He's not fine. He hasn't spoken above a whisper since that day." Veronica didn't move. Didn't speak. She didn't need to. The words landed like stones on every soul in the room. When Howard Briggs finished, he looked like a man hollowed out but still standing. Veronica leaned forward. "Mr. Briggs," she said, voice gentle but firm, "thank you for your courage. I know this isn't easy." He nodded, lips pressed into a line to keep the tears from escaping. "I just want to know," he said, voice cracking, "that it meant something. That somebody's finally listening." Veronica stared at him. Not as a judge. Not as a symbol. But as a mother, a woman, a person who had also sat in silence while someone else decided her worth. "You've been heard," she said. And that was the truth. Howard stepped down, walking slowly past the defense table, the same officers who had nearly killed his son. They couldn't look him in the eye. And that silence was louder than any verdict. Veronica called a short recess. Her chambers felt heavier now, quieter. Not the absence of sound kind of quiet, but the kind that wraps around you like a weighted blanket soaked in memory. She stood at the wash basin, staring into the mirror. The raw patch on her scalp still stung, the uneven strands a stark reminder of how close injustice could get even to those wearing robes. She didn't fix her hair. She didn't fix her face. Because this wasn't about looking whole. This was about standing whole. A knock broke the silence. Her clerk stepped in. "Your Honor. The U.S. Attorney's Office just submitted a sealed motion. They want to escalate charges against Dobson's civil rights violations under federal law." Veronica blinked once. "Good," she said. The door closed again. And she let out a slow breath. Not out of relief. Out of resolve. Because the courtroom had seen Dobson fall. But they hadn't seen what came next. And the real reckoning was just beginning. When Veronica returned, the room was full but changed. The tension hadn't faded. It had sharpened. Clarified. It wasn't fear now. It was anticipation. Respect. A new kind of gravity. The kind that makes people sit straighter. Speak softer. Rethink everything. She walked back to the bench. No one announced her return. There was no ceremonial flourish. Only the sound of her shoes and the quiet rustle of her robe. And yet everyone stood. Not because protocol demanded it. But because something inside them did. She didn't speak immediately. She looked out at the crowd, at journalists, lawyers, officers, citizens, and let them see her as she was now, not just a judge, but the line between silence and truth. She tapped the gavel once. Court is now in session. She turned to the prosecution. "Call your next witness." And the room hushed again, because everyone knew. They weren't watching a trial anymore. They were watching a system unravel. A new witness took the stand. Lieutenant Daniel Cook, clean-shaven, built like a linebacker, with a posture that screamed textbook protocol. He sat stiffly, hands folded, voice clipped. He was the kind of officer trained to smile through scrutiny, deflect with calm precision, and weaponize neutrality. The prosecutor began, "Lieutenant Cook, you were present at the demonstration on May 14th of last year, correct?" "Yes, ma'am." "And you oversaw a team of how many officers?" 7. "Did you authorize the use of force?" "I authorized non-lethal crowd control measures," Cook replied smoothly. "After protesters became aggressive. There were objects thrown, bottles, rocks, some were armed." "Any injuries reported from your officers?" "No, ma'am." "And injuries to protesters?" "Minor. Mostly bruises." That was when Veronica cut in. Her voice was colder now. Sharper. "Lieutenant Cook." He turned. His shoulders twitched slightly. "Do you consider a crushed trachea to be a minor injury?" He froze. Eyes darting. Mouth slightly ajar. "No, ma'am." "Of course not." She leaned forward. "Then why does your official report describe that injury as soft tissue trauma consistent with resistance?" He blinked. "That's standard language. Based on initial impressions." "Initial impressions from whom?" He hesitated. "I believe Officer Valdez filled that section." "Did you review and approve it?" A pause. Then, "Yes, Your Honor." Veronica let that hang for a second. Then, knowing the victim was 17 and unarmed? He opened his mouth. Closed it. Then quietly, "Yes." Her voice was unwavering. "Do you believe justice was served that day?" Cook straightened. "I believe we followed protocol." She sat back. "That wasn't the question." He cleared his throat again. "With respect, Your Honor. I can't answer that. That's not my role." She nodded. "No. It's mine." She turned to the prosecutor. "You may proceed." The rest of Cook's testimony was methodical. Dry. Clinical. He recited procedures like scripture. But every word exposed something deeper, how violence could be hidden in language. How routine became a shield. How a crushed windpipe could be filed away like it was a paperwork error. When the court recessed again, the gallery buzzed like a hive of controlled outrage. Reporters typed faster. Advocates whispered fiercely. A woman in the back row clutched her chest as Veronica passed, mouthing, "Thank you." Veronica didn't stop. She walked with purpose, each step heavier than the last. Back in chambers, she hung her robe carefully. Let her hands fall to her sides. Stared at it. At how plain it looked on a hanger. And yet, hours earlier, without it she had been treated like a criminal. Same woman. Same dignity. Same mind. But no robe. And that had been enough to erase her humanity in their eyes. A knock at the door. Her clerk entered again. "Your Honor, there's someone here from the DOJ." Veronica turned. "Send them in." A tall man in a gray suit stepped inside. Briefcase in one hand. A sealed envelope in the other. "Judge Hayes," he said calmly, "I'm from the Office of Civil Rights." She nodded once. He handed her the envelope. "We've launched an investigation into the Atlanta Federal Courthouse. Multiple allegations tied to staff conduct, report suppression, and obstruction of justice. What happened this morning, it triggered a Title 18 review." Veronica unfolded the letter. Skimmed it. Absorbed every word. "Good," she said. The man continued. "Also, the footage of the screening room, it's gone viral. CNN. MSNBC. Every social feed. Even a few members of the Senate are watching. She gave the faintest shake of her head. I didn't do it for them. The man smiled. Exactly why it matters. He turned to leave. And she turned back to her desk, where more names were waiting. More witnesses. More truth. Because the courtroom had erupted. But the fire hadn't finished burning. Not even close. The gallery was bursting at the seams now. Not just media. Not just lawyers. But citizens. Activists. Students. Witnesses to justice in real time. Her clerk leaned in. The defense attorneys are requesting a motion for recusal. Veronica blinked. Of course they were. She stepped into the courtroom again. All rise. The room obeyed. She took her seat. Tapped the gavel once. Be seated. A defense attorney stood. Confident. Tailored. The kind of man who polished his shoes more than his conscience. Your Honor, we'd like to formally request your recusal due to recent developments which may affect impartiality. Veronica stared at him. You mean the arrest of Deputy Dobson and the incident in the hallway? Yes, Your Honor. And your concern is? That these events raise the appearance of bias. She stood. Walked slowly to the edge of the bench. Let me be clear. I was assaulted. Not because of what I did, but because of who I am. A black woman entering a courthouse. She paused. Let the room absorb it. What did I do in response? I took my seat. Conducted this hearing. Followed every rule. She leaned forward. You want to talk about bias? Let's talk about the 12 ignored complaints. The officers you defend. The judges who signed off. The attorney opened his mouth to object. She didn't let him. This court will proceed. I will not recuse myself. If you believe due process is threatened, you are welcome to appeal. I'll prepare the paperwork myself. And with that, she tapped the gavel again. Next witness. The next witness was unexpected. Not a victim. Not a protester. But someone who had once worked inside these very halls. Denise Talley. Middle-aged. Black. Crisp blazer. Tightly cropped hair. Thick-rimmed glasses. She walked with quiet certainty, the kind that doesn't demand attention but earns it. Veronica recognized her instantly. Denise had worked in court records for nearly a decade. She was one of those invisible engines that kept the building running but never got credit, never got power. Today, that changed. She took the stand. Swore her oath. The prosecutor approached. Ms. Talley, can you tell us about your former role at this courthouse? I was record supervisor for 8 years. Before that, I worked the front desk. And during your time here, were you ever made aware of complaints filed against Deputy Dobson? Denise didn't blink. Yes. Too many to count. Can you estimate how many formal complaints? 12. At least twice that many informal. The gallery stirred. Someone gasped softly. What happened to those complaints? Denise looked directly at Veronica. Then answered slowly. They were mishandled. Some marked as resolved when they weren't. Some disappeared. Who gave those instructions? A long pause. Then, Judge Terrence Mahoney. It hit like thunder. Veronica's former mentor. The man who once told her she was what the bench needed. Now he was the architect of silence. The courtroom shook quietly, but undeniably. Mahoney had retired just months earlier. Clean reputation. Respected legacy. And now, Denise Talley had exposed the rotting core beneath his robe. Did he explain why he suppressed the reports? He said bringing them forward would undermine trust. That it would make the court look weak. Veronica sat perfectly still. Because that precise lie was one she had heard before. Justice delayed to preserve appearance. Abuse tolerated in the name of order. Denise's voice rose. I watched Dobson walk these halls with impunity. I watched young black interns get searched. I watched witnesses get intimidated. And every time I said something, she looked out at the room. I was told, that's just how it is. Her voice cracked. Well, not anymore. Veronica didn't speak. She didn't have to. Because the truth had already taken the microphone. She called another recess. But no one left. People stood just to breathe. Just to process. Just to be present in a moment that was shifting the ground beneath them. Veronica returned to chambers. Looked out the window. The crowd outside had grown tenfold. Signs were visible even through the glass. Justice starts now. Protect black women. 12 complaints. 0 accountability. She closed her eyes. Not to retreat. But to feel it. All of it. A knock. Her clerk again, but this time, someone else stood behind her. Reverend Marcus Hill. Gray beard. Deep eyes. Shoulders worn from decades of marching, preaching, surviving. Judge Hayes, he said. We're out there. We see you. And we're with you. He handed her a folded list. Handwritten. Names. Numbers. Notes. They were victims too. Of Dobson. Or others like him. Some never filed. Some were told it wasn't worth it. Veronica scanned the names. Her voice low. They were wrong. It is worth it now. The Reverend smiled. It is because of you. He left. She remained. Holding not just a list, but a ledger of unfinished justice. Back in the courtroom, the gallery had doubled. Reporters live-streamed. People outside watched through courthouse windows, phones pressed to glass. When Veronica returned, they stood again. But this time, it wasn't habit. It was honor. She tapped the gavel. We're ready to proceed. The prosecution called an unexpected witness, Andrew Taylor. Late 50s. Black. U.S. Marshal. Walked with a limp. He had once worked in this same courthouse. Now, he returned not to protect, but to testify. I worked here from 2004 to 2012. I saw a lot. Most of it I let slide. He glanced at Veronica. I didn't want to be the angry black officer. Then, but what I saw from Dobson. I should have reported. And I didn't. And I regret it. He went on. He started with disrespect. Then force. By 2010, he wasn't just aggressive. He was dangerous. Did you report him? Yes. To Internal Affairs. The memo disappeared. What were you told? Andrew's face hardened. He's the kind of man we want handling difficult people. Gasps. Whispers. Veronica's gavel calmed them. I left 2 years later, he said. Not because of the job. But because of the silence. He looked directly at her. What you did coming back to that bench, it's bigger than a trial. Bigger than a badge. And for the first time that day, Veronica had no words. Because when history speaks, sometimes all you can do is listen. The next morning, the courthouse was cloaked in a different kind of silence. Not peace. Pressure. Low clouds hovered over Atlanta like judgment. The marble steps of the courthouse glistened with dew and tension. But inside Veronica Hayes's chambers, the air was ice. On her desk sat a thick manila folder. No note. No message. Just a nod from a court administrator who dropped it off like it burned his fingers to hold it. She opened it. Inside, documents, internal memos, complaint records, signatures. 12 formal complaints against Carl Dobson. All dismissed. All signed off by the same name, Judge Terrence Mahoney. Her mentor. The man who'd told her she was the future of the court. The same man who had stamped. Lack of corroboration. Unsubstantiated. No further action required. And then tucked near the back a memo. Confidential. A direct exchange between Mahoney and the head of courthouse security, dated 5 years prior. She read it twice. Then a third time. Dobson may be rough around the edges, but he keeps order. Especially with certain groups. Best to leave well enough alone. Veronica's hands clenched the paper until it crumpled. There it was. The quiet part said out loud. Not just Dobson. But a system that kept him safe. That needed him to be dangerous. So long as it served order. She leaned back in her chair. Her reflection stared back at her from the polished desk, uneven hair, tired eyes, but a fire behind them now blazing. A knock. Her clerk again. Your Honor. The Senate Judiciary Committee has issued a formal inquiry. They want your statement on oversight failures linked to the Dobson case. Veronica didn't blink. Of course they do. Now that the cameras are rolling. The clerk hesitated. Also, 2 retired judges and a former district attorney resigned this morning. Citing health reasons. Veronica stood. Bring in the attorneys. All of them. By mid-morning, the courtroom was overflowing. Not just Atlanta media. National. International. BBC. The New York Times. Civil rights attorneys from D.C., law students from Emory, even clergy from South Georgia sat shoulder to shoulder in the gallery. The buzz was low but electric. Veronica took her seat. Tapped the gavel. Before we proceed with closing arguments, I am entering new material into the record. Her clerk handed out copies to both tables. This includes all complaints filed against Carl Dobson. All internal correspondence regarding their suppression. And the names of every official who dismissed or buried them. A defense attorney rose, mouth open, ready to object. Sit down, Veronica said. Quiet. Final. She turned to the gallery. Let the record show this court is no longer interested in protecting institutions at the expense of individuals. We are no longer pretending that silence is neutrality. Her eyes swept the room. Every signature in this folder is not a mistake, it's a choice. A choice to ignore victims. A choice to protect predators. A choice to preserve an illusion of order built on fear. Then she locked eyes with the defense attorney. And it ends today. The room was silent. So silent, you could hear a pen stop scratching. Then a voice from the back. Shaky. Elderly. Your Honor, may I speak? Veronica paused. Step forward. A man in his 60s walked slowly, holding his cap in his hands. My name is Louis Bryant. In 2011, I was arrested in this building. By Dobson. I was angry my daughter's case got dismissed. I raised my voice. He slammed me into a wall. Broke 2 ribs. Veronica nodded. Was a complaint filed? I filed it myself. Right over there. They told me I fell. That's what the report said. I never came back. But I'm here now. Veronica looked around the room. Anyone else? Silence. Then one hand rose. Then another. 5. 10. 15. A wave of hands. Every single one with a story. Every single one with a silence that had lasted far too long. And now finally a voice. Veronica didn't cry. She didn't smile. She didn't even move. She just watched. As the truth rose all around her. Not whispered. Not hidden. But spoken at last. The final day of hearings began with rain. Not a drizzle. Not a cleansing sprinkle. But a storm. Thunder rolled through Atlanta. Streets flooded. Umbrellas flipped in the wind. But still they came. Reporters. Protesters. Clerks. Survivors. They came soaked in purpose. Because this wasn't a courtroom anymore. It was a battlefield. Inside, the atmosphere pulsed. The wood of the benches, the tile beneath their shoes, it all felt charged, like the whole building was holding its breath. And then she entered. Judge Veronica Hayes. No announcement. No gavel. She stepped to the bench, then paused. And slowly, in front of the nation, she removed her robe. Folded it gently. Laid it across the chair. She stood there not protected by tradition. But armed with truth. I've sat behind this bench for years, she said. I've followed rules. Worn the title. But I've also stayed silent when I should have screamed. She scanned the room. Today, I'm done being quiet. She turned to the gallery full of survivors, witnesses, law students, citizens. This court finds Carl Matthew Dobson guilty of abuse of power, violation of civil rights, and official misconduct. A beat. But it doesn't stop there. She stepped forward. Effective immediately, I am instituting a policy for all courthouse staff in this district. She raised a folder. It's called the Hayes Mandate. Murmurs rippled. Mandatory anti-bias training. Psychological evaluations. Regular performance audits. And a zero-tolerance policy for discriminatory behavior in every federal courtroom under my jurisdiction. She looked them all in the eyes. This should have never happened. And I will make damn sure it never happens again. Small nods. Silent tears. Hands gripping hands. She continued. This is not about revenge. This is about responsibility. About looking this broken system in the eye and saying, not anymore. She turned to the defense. To those who enabled him for 15 years, consider yourselves on notice. Then she tapped the folder. Recommendations for disbarment, oversight review, and possible federal charges will be submitted to the Department of Justice for every official who buried the truth. The courtroom didn't move. Couldn't move. Then, finally, she looked toward the side entrance. And nodded. The doors opened. And Carl Dobson walked in. Still in cuffs. No uniform. His face was hollow now, ashen and sunken. Not broken by fists. But by truth. He was led to the front. Veronica faced him not with vengeance. But with fire. Carl Dobson, she said, this court sentences you to the maximum allowable penalties under federal law. 6 years for abuse of power. 5 years for civil rights violations. 1 year for obstruction. He didn't flinch. But she wasn't finished. That's the legal part. She stepped closer. Now here's the human part. Her voice dropped. Sharper than steel. You spent a career deciding who was worthy of dignity. You thought the badge made you untouchable. That silence would protect you. She stared straight through him. Well, now you get to sit in the seat you made for others. No badge. No uniform. Just the weight of what you've done. She turned to the bailiffs. Take him away. No cheers. No applause. Just eyes. Watching justice, not as vengeance. But as accountability. That afternoon, Veronica sat alone in her chambers. The robe hung behind her again. But today, it felt different. Lighter. Not because the burden was gone but because she had said it all out loud. A knock. Her sister, Nain, entered. No words. Just a small stool. A pair of clippers. "You ready?" Nain asked. Veronica met her gaze in the mirror. No fear now. Only resolve. Yeah. Nain moved slowly. Carefully. Each pass of the clippers wasn't shame this time. It was choice. A clean start. When she finished, she handed Veronica a mirror. She looked at herself bare, strong, bold. "You could rock that every damn day and still own every room you walk into," Nain said. Veronica smiled softly. "This is who I am now." Nain corrected her. "No. This is who you've always been. The world just caught up." That evening, Veronica left the courthouse. No hat. No scarf. No apology. Just her. Walking into the city lights. A woman in her 70s approached her. Brown skin. Thick glasses. She placed a hand gently on Veronica's arm. "I never thought I'd live to see someone like you do what you just did." Veronica took her hand. "You did more than survive. You paved the road." From behind, a teenage girl stepped forward. She said nothing. Just pulled back her hoodie, revealing her own shaved head. She nodded. Veronica nodded back. Something passed between them. A silent inheritance. That night, Veronica stood on her porch. She didn't check the news. Didn't look at her phone. She just stood. Breathing. Whole. For the first time in a long time, not fighting to be seen. Just being. Weeks later, the call came. Not for an interview. Not for an op-ed. But from the White House. Veronica Hayes had been chosen to receive the Presidential Medal of Justice, the highest civilian honor for service to the cause of equity, civil rights, and constitutional integrity. The ceremony would be televised. Dignitaries in the room. Senators. Supreme Court justices. But none of that mattered to her. What mattered was the front row. Nain. Her clerk. Megan, now a first-year law student. Reverend Hill. And near the end, the teenage girl with the shaved head. The stage was white marble. Steps led up to a polished podium. The president stood nearby, applauding with the others as Judge Veronica Hayes stepped forward. She didn't wave. Didn't smile. She stood at the mic and began. "I wasn't supposed to be here." The room stilled instantly. Not because I wasn't qualified. Not because I didn't earn it. But because, for most of my life, systems like this weren't built with people like me in mind. She paused. And when I finally stepped into the spaces I had worked my whole life to reach, I was still reminded I didn't belong. She let the silence stretch. But I stayed. I stood and I made them see me. She scanned the crowd. "I'm not here because I'm special. I'm here because I was lucky enough to survive a moment that should have broken me, and because I knew too many others who didn't." A flashbulb popped. She looked out. So this medal isn't just mine. It belongs to every woman who was told to be quiet. Every man who was told justice wasn't for him. Every child who looked at the law and saw only fear. She let the final words come slowly. "This is for you." Applause rose, not loud and explosive, but deep. Respectful. The kind of applause that comes from understanding, not celebration. When the ceremony ended, Veronica stepped off the stage. And somewhere far away in a state prison across the state line, Carl Dobson watched from a small mounted television. He didn't move. Didn't blink. Didn't speak. He just stared at the woman he had once tried to reduce. A woman now standing before the world, honored for the very strength he had tried to erase. The screen faded to black. But the silence stayed with him. Not punishment. Just truth. This wasn't just a story about a judge. Or a courthouse. It was about dignity. About truth. About what happens when someone finally says, enough. Judge Veronica Hayes didn't just uphold the law. She became the line in the sand. She reminded us, justice isn't about punishment. It's about accountability. It's about having the courage to rise after being stripped down. To speak when silence is easier, and to lead not with vengeance but with vision. If this story moved you, if it made you feel seen, if it reminded you that change is still possible, don't keep it to yourself. Because justice doesn't end in the courtroom. It begins with us. Together. Right now.